There was an extraordinary place in Palo Alto that Xerox had sponsored. It was called Xerox PARC, and they had a bunch of computer scientists there who basically developed the modern personal computer. But because it was Xerox, which was a copier company, they were looking for products as an offshoot of this research company that could be useful for their copier business. But the mouse was invented at Xerox PARC. Basically, the graphic integrated screen, the little images of the trash can and the various paper that you click, the so-called GUI interface, the Ethernet, all these things were invented by Xerox. But they never patented them because it wasn't really what they had sent those scientists there for. And as a result, when these young guys like Steve Jobs in particular we all went, all the filmmakers went to this lab, and they were very nice, the scientists there, and they showed us everything. And we said, my God, you're going to be able to make movies with this stuff. You know, you're going to have a studio, and it will have a network of computers, and you'll just, I used to describe it as like having a big clothesline going through all the departments of the movie company, and you'll put an idea on the clothesline and send it over to the writing department, and they'll write a little story, and then send it over to the graphics department, and they'll do some sketches, and we'll make movies that way. Of course, what happened was Steve Jobs saw that and created the Macintosh computer based on all of those unique inventions that were done at Xerox PARC, and then Microsoft, which of course you'll remember. I don't know, you're a pretty young group here, but you'll remember DOS, Microsoft DOS. They freaked out when they saw the Macintosh because they said, "My God, this is." So then they came up with Windows, and Apple sued Microsoft for Windows, and of course the case said, well, wait, neither of you guys invented it. It was all invented by Xerox, and they didn't patent it. And I think Gates made a wonderful comment. He says, well, it was like Xerox were these rich people on the hill, and they didn't mind if you came up and took their furniture and stuff. So, you know, I mean, if someone retroactively awarded Xerox, 10% of the whole personal computer industry and all of what happened, it would be fair because they invented it. But just as IBM, years before, the man who invented the Xerox machine went to IBM with his little xerography concept and asked IBM to take it and develop it, and they studied it, and then they went back to him and says, well, IBM, International Business Machine, would know, but we have studied it, and there's no place for this Xerox machine in the American business office. So what does that tell you? It's that whatever field you're in, you're blind. IBM could only see what they were doing, which was mainframes. Xerox could only do copying machines, and they owned the whole future computer industry, but they couldn't see it.
Right.
So that means there's always an opportunity for someone who can see something that the big guy is blind to. And it's happened already 2 times. I'm sure it's happened more than that. So that's a fascinating principle in business.
Sort of returning to sort of the acting field, difficult actors. Brando had a reputation as being difficult. You worked with him on The Godfather. Was he difficult on that film? More generally, in terms of dealing with difficult actors, were you such a famed director that it wasn't so much of an issue?
No, I was not a famed director. I was a kid. I was a theater student, which meant that there was no one I looked up to more than Elia Kazan and the group theater and Marlon Brando. I mean, he was the hero of all theater students in the 60s. The interesting story I'll tell you, because it'll show what the casting was like in those days. Of course, I suggested Al Pacino in the movie and Marlon Brando, and Paramount absolutely hated my ideas, and they were very seriously wondered if they had the wrong director. They only got me on the picture. First of all, The Godfather was meant to be a very low-budget film. It was supposed to cost $2.5 million, and they wanted to have an Italian-American director because they figured if there was a lot of flack from Italian-American groups that we could say, oh, well, he's Italian-American, and he did it. And also, And also I was a screenwriter, and they really were having trouble adapting the book into a script. So I got this absurd opportunity. But in those days, you have to understand that many important directors had turned it down. Kazan turned it down, the great Greek director, Costa Gavras turned it down. Many people turned it down. So I was chosen, but I had no power and I had no status. And then when I started to suggest people like Al Pacino, who's a little short guy, you know, and Evans used to refer to him as a runt, and a bunch of names that no one had heard of, they said, you know, and then I said, look, let me shoot some screen tests and I'll show you what I mean. So I took these guys all to San Francisco, and for $1.98, we shot some screen tests. My wife gave Al Pacino his haircut and everything, and they looked at it and they were appalled. They thought it was all terrible. And Charlie Bluthorn, who was really the big boss, said, you know, this is crazy. He says, the actor for Al Pacino, he's terrible. He says, the actor for he's terrible. He says, that actor, he's terrible. He says, you know, these actors not terrible. It's the director who's terrible. So I was in deep, deep trouble. And then they said, okay, who do you have for The Godfather? So in a meeting, I'll never forget this. I was in a meeting in Beverly Hills with the president and all the executives. And I said, well, I think, you know, since The Godfather's an older man, you're not going to find a newcomer, because obviously, if a guy is 60 years old, though, you would have heard of him before, you know. So I think, you know, there's one of perhaps the greatest actors in the world, or the two. I mean, there's Laurence Olivier. I mean, he could conceivably, he's English, but he sort of looks like Vito Genovese, and he could be an interesting choice. Or there's Marlon Brando, who is, you know, although he's only about 47 years old, he's such a great actor, I think he could do it. Well, the ice in the room was scary. And the then president of Paramount, I won't say his name, turned to me and he says, Francis, as the president of Paramount Picture, I forbid you to ever mention the name Marlon Brando again, and I assure you that Marlon Brando will not appear in this motion picture. So I don't know why I did it, but I just sort of fell out of my chair on the carpet as though I was dead. And they said, what is it? I said, well, if I can't even talk about my ideas, it's hopeless. I mean, Marlon Brando is a good idea. And even the writer, Mario Puzo, agrees. So they said, okay, we'll say this. A, if Marlon Brando will do a screen test, and B, if Marlon Brando will do the motion picture for nothing, for no fee, and 3, if Marlon Brando will put up $1 million bond that he will not have bad behavior that affects the film, then you can discuss it. So I said, okay, because I had improved greatly from when they told me. So the question I didn't know Marlon Brando, and I only had the highest regard for him. So the question was, how was I going to get him to do a screen test? So I called up the number I had and arranged, and I got to talk to him. And I said, Mr. Brando, I said, I think that perhaps, you know, since he's Italian and he's much older than you, maybe we ought to, you know, kind of experiment, do a few improvs to see if you feel comfortable about playing this character. And he knew the book, so you know, obviously he was down and out. He didn't have dough, and he said to me, as I recall, okay. And I had done a little research about Brando, and I realized that Brando didn't like loud noises. He always wore earplugs in his ears. And it was because he didn't like harsh sounds. So I got a couple of my San Francisco friends. I said, we're going to go to Brando's house early in the morning, but we have to be like ninja. We have to do everything with sign language. We don't want to make any noise. And I went to the grocery store and I bought some salami and some provolone cheese and some mortadella and little things like that, and those little Italian cigars. And we flew down to LA with a 16mm camera and my ninja group. And we went to his house there on Mulholland in the morning, and I rang the bell and the maid said, oh, he's not up yet. So we went in and we set up. and we were rating. And then sure enough, and I took all these little cold cuts and I just put them on little dishes because I thought the kind of actor he is, he doesn't really want you to engage in actor talk. He just wants you to put maybe some of the ingredients that he could choose and create a character. So sure enough, about, I don't know what time it was, 9:30 or so, the door opened and out comes this man with long blonde hair in a Japanese robe, Marlon Brando, beautiful, handsome guy. He was only about 44. And he said, you know, he came out.
Mumbling.
And he went and he saw, and he's such an intelligent man. He was such a brilliant man. He knew exactly what was up, what I was doing. So he went and he got a can of shoe polish and he started to put his long blonde hair up, and just with the shoe polish, he started to make it black. And he was going the whole time, you know. And I had brought some Italian-looking shirts, and he put it on. And I remember he took his collar. He says, "Those guys, they're always the collar's bent, you know." And it took a long time to bend the collar, and he started to take the cheese, and just it was a miracle. He just started to turn into this guy. And he said, "Well, you know, I think you should have the face of a bulldog." And he put some Kleenex in his jaw, and he's going like this, and he's like not saying anything, you know. And so finally, you know, there he is, and he's turning into the character, and we're shooting him, and it was amazing because he's going, and the phone rings in his house. So he gets the phone, he goes, and I always wondered what the guy on the line must have thought. So he does it, and I take this tape. I had a little, in the early days of the Sony camcorders, and I was shooting this whole process, and the guys in it, and I left. I thanked him, and I left. And then I made a calculated decision, which might be useful to you, is I decided not to take this to Bob Evans or the president or anything, because I flew to New York. And I went right to Charlie Bluth. I figured he's the one who's going to make the decision. So why should I go through these other layers?